All right, picture this. It's December 2025. You're at the airport, trying to get home for the holidays, right? But instead of festive cheer, it's just chaos. Your flight's canceled. So are thousands of others. And this wasn't some freak snowstorm. Nope. This was the catastrophic, system-wide collapse of India's biggest airline, Indigo. So the big question is, how does a company famous for being hyper-efficient just suddenly and completely break? Well, let's get into it.
So, to really grasp the scale of this meltdown, just look at this number, 1,600. That's how many flights Indigo canceled on December 5th, in a single day. We're talking more than half their entire schedule just gone. This wasn't just some big disruption, This was basically a forced reboot of the entire country's aviation backbone. And the reason? It's almost unbelievable. The airline had literally run out of pilots who were legally allowed to fly.
And this thing didn't just happen overnight. This timeline really shows you how a problem that was totally predictable just spiraled out of control. I mean, the cracks were already there in November. Look at that, over 1,200 cancellations from crew shortages. Then, a small tech outage in early December, well, that hit their fragile system like a ton of bricks. By December 4th, it was a mess. Less than 1 in 5 flights were on time. And then, the very next day, the 5th, total network collapse. It was like a slow-burning fire that just suddenly exploded.
Okay, so what was the actual trigger? What was the spark that lit the fuse? Well, officially, the reason everyone pointed to was a brand new safety regulation. And this was a rule specifically designed to fight pilot fatigue. So let's take a closer look at what this new rule actually changed. Yeah, it's called FDTL, which stands for Flight Duty Time Limitations. And the whole idea behind it is pretty simple, right? Well-rested pilots are safe pilots. I mean, when you think about it, pilot fatigue is a factor in something like 20% of fatal air accidents around the world. So these rules are a big deal. They put really strict limits on how long pilots can work, how much rest they have to get, and what they can do during their shifts, especially at night. And this table here really breaks down the most critical changes. Okay, so the weekly rest period bumped up from 36 to 48 hours. Night was officially an hour longer. But the real killer, the one that changed everything, was the new cap on night landings. It was slashed from a maximum of 6 all the way down to just 2. Now, for an airline like Indigo, that was a massive problem. It meant a single crew just couldn't do those complex, multi-stop overnight routes anymore. This one change, right here, completely broke their entire system for scheduling pilots. Which, of course, brings us to the million-dollar question. These new safety rules, they apply to every single airline in India. So how come only Indigo, the biggest player in the market, completely fell apart? Well, this is where a much-needed safety rule accidentally shines a huge spotlight on a really, really flawed corporate strategy. And wow, this chart pretty much says it all, doesn't it? Look at this. Indigo was running on fumes with a razor-thin buffer of just 13 pilots for every single one of their planes. Now, compare that to their main competitor, Air India. They had 19. And then look at a newer airline like Akasa Air, a whopping 26 pilots per plane. See, Indigo's entire model was built for maximum efficiency, but only if everything went perfectly. It had zero slack, absolutely no resilience to absorb a shock like these new rules. And hey, you don't have to take my word for it. The pilots themselves, through their own union, called it out directly. They said the whole disruption was because of the airline's prolonged and unorthodox lean manpower strategy. I mean, in their eyes, this wasn't some unfortunate accident. It was a deliberate business choice that sooner or later was bound to hit a wall. And that choice becomes absolutely crystal clear when you see what their competitors were doing. See, other airlines saw these new rules coming from a mile away and did the sensible thing. They cut back their schedules to create some breathing room. But Indigo, they did the exact opposite. They actually increased their winter schedule by over 6%. It's like they were betting they could just defy the laws of math, adding more flights while knowing they'd have fewer pilot hours available. It was a huge gamble, and it was pretty much guaranteed to fail. But hold on a minute. An airline can't just invent a flight schedule out of thin air and start flying it. It needs to be approved. And that brings us to the third major failure in this whole saga. The government regulator, the DGCA, the very people who were supposed to be the watchdog. Honestly, this part is just mind-boggling. The regulator, the DGCA, actually signed off on Indigo's plan to increase its flights by 6%. They did this knowing full well that these new rules were about to slash the airline's pilot availability by 15 to 20%. You don't have to be a math genius to see that that doesn't add up.
It was an impossible schedule, totally dead on arrival, and the regulator gave it the green light anyway.
So, as you can imagine, the fallout from this massive oversight was pretty severe. The DGCA, in what was a pretty rare admission of failure, ended up terminating the contracts of the 4 inspectors assigned to Indigo. The official reason? Negligence in their monitoring duties. In other words, they were fired because they didn't raise the alarm on something that should have been blindingly obvious. The airline simply didn't have enough pilots to fly the schedule they were approved for.
So, let's recap. You've got a risky airline strategy, a failed regulatory oversight, and the result was inevitable. The whole system just collapsed. Now let's talk about the price tag for this massive failure.
First up, the government had to step in big time. The Ministry of Civil Aviation literally ordered Indigo to cut 10% of its flights. Now, that is a huge deal. It was a totally unprecedented move just to try and stabilize the entire country's flight network that this one airline had managed to break.
Next, you have Wall Street, or in this case, Dalal Street. The financial markets, well, they reacted exactly how you'd expect. Instantly. Investor confidence just vanished, and the airline's stock price took a nosedive, plummeting more than 16% in just a matter of days.
And to put that 16% into perspective, we're talking about a staggering $4.5 billion in investor wealth that was just wiped out, gone, in only 6 trading sessions. That is a brutal, brutal price to pay for a failure that everyone should have seen coming.
Okay, so the government's emergency response had 3 main parts. 1, we already saw this, the forced flight cuts. 2, they slapped on fare caps to stop other airlines from price gouging stranded passengers. But the third one, this was the really controversial one. They issued a temporary exemption to the very safety rules that started this whole mess. They rolled them back just to get planes flying again. A move that, as you can guess, pilot unions were furious about, saying it sacrificed safety just to bail out a company.
And the reputational damage went global, too. The international ratings agency Moody's stepped in, labeled the whole mess credit negative, and specifically downgraded Indigo on its human capital score. That's basically a damning international verdict on the management's lack of judgment and preparedness. So when you step back and look at the whole thing, what's the big lesson here? Well, the Indigo meltdown was a powerful and very public reminder of something really important. A business model that is built only on lean efficiency with absolutely no buffer for when things go wrong, it's just incredibly fragile. When it gets hit with a predictable challenge, it doesn't just bend. It completely shatters. And that really leaves us with one final big question to think about. We know this crisis was born from a mix of corporate strategy and regulatory failure. But when a system like this is pushed right to its breaking point, all in the name of efficiency, who's the one who really pays the price for that fragility? Is it the shareholders, the executives, or is it the hundreds of thousands of regular people just like you left stranded on the terminal floor?